Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today we are going to discuss the newspaper analysis of 9th March 2024 and we are going to look at all the important articles from today's newspaper. But before we go further, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video if you like our initiatives and do comment on the videos about everything that you feel with regards to the initiatives. So first, to look at all the topics that we have today, there are two important topics that we have taken from the editorial page. This is one, India's suboptimal use of its labor power. This is the first article. And then the second article is gender equality as the plank of sustainable development. So these are the two articles on the editorial page that we are going to discuss in detail. Apart from that, from the perspective of the prelims examination, there are 5 articles that we are going to discuss. Now these 5 articles, first is about BrahMos missiles and we'll discuss about what the new idea here is. And then after that we are talking about the new PM solar free electricity scheme. And then after that some data with regards to inflation, the food prices. And then what is EFTA we'll discuss, and then after that there is one small update with regards to the Israel-Palestine issue. So we'll discuss about all these from the perspective of prelims and some of the updates you can see. So let's start with the first article, and the first article that we have right here is this: India's suboptimal use of its labor power. Now, what exactly this article is saying, let's try to understand that first. What is the context of this article, and then we'll delve into the details of this article. Now, this article basically has been talking about certain issues with regards to India's labor. What it says is that a significant proportion of India's workforce earns its livelihood through labor rather than capital or land ownership, which approximately where what we see is that approximately 90% of the labor force is employed informally, and that's why they lack in job security, they lack in benefits and also all the social protection, and they earn very low wages with respect to what they should. And the informal employment spans across casual laborers and also self-employment individuals, even touching some of the very regular and salaried workers as well. And it also discusses about some of the discussions around GDP growth with regards to what is GDP growth saying, what is the data saying, and also the real impact that it has on the living standards that depends on the labor market conditions, including the job creation or job quality or even the wage increases. So recent data from the periodic labor force survey, what it has been saying is that there has been an increase in the labor force participation rate between 2017 to 2022, and it has increased from 52%, approximately 52%, and it has gone up to approximately 58%. So this is what the data says, and with regards to what it says is that this has been largely driven by women in the rural areas, which is something that, so this is because of women in rural areas. So this opportunities has been a rise in the women in the rural areas. So this is exactly what it has been saying. Now overall, when it comes to the unemployment rates, what it says is that the unemployment rates have decreased from 6.2% in 2017-18 to approximately 4.2% in 2021-22. So it has decreased from 6.2% to 4.2% in these 5 years. That is between 2017-18 to 2021-22. And also when we look at the employment rates among the youth, then in that case also we see the similar downtrend, but there the rates are a bit higher. So the same downtrend is also seen in the unemployment rates among the youths, but in that case we have seen that this rate is little higher, approximately 1.5 to 2% higher than the exact unemployment rate of the entire country. Now it also talks about that there has been a rise of self-employment, and especially among the unpaid family workers, And this is something which is concerning according to the article, that here what we have seen is that although there has been a rise in employment, but this employment opportunities are not getting paid. So this is, for example, when we say self-employment, it could be a home run shop where there is somebody who is just helping in running that shop and is not earning anything out of it. So for example, let's say father is running the shop and the son or the daughter is helping in running that shop. So that son or daughter is not earning anything, just helping. So in a manner, they are employed, but they are not earning out of it. So this is also something that has been written in this article about what's really happening in the rates increasing, although the employment opportunities not paying many of these people. Then also it talks about quality of employment. It says that the quality of employment also appears to be worsening with an increase in low quality work, especially among the unpaid family workers and also the own account workers. So overall, when it talks about all these issues, it says that although we are looking at certain data which says that the things are going good, but we also need to dive into these micro details as well to understand where the problems lie, so that we can fix some of these issues, we can fill the gaps that we are looking at when it comes to the entire understanding and crunching of the data with regards to all the economic activities in India. So overall, that's why these are the things that are being discussed in this article. And what it also says is that when it comes to India's demographic dividend, there is a period of very high potential, high labor productivity is not being fully utilized due to engagement of a large proportion of the workforce in very low quality work. And that also is something which is negatively impacting the consumer expenditure and economic growth altogether. So that's why this is a basic summary of what this article talks about. Now, looking at some of the issues that this article has mentioned, first, or overall, let's say when we look at the Indian economy and some of the issues, some of these problems have been mentioned in this article, and some of these issues are something that we are going beyond the article. So first, the employment nature and the informality. Now, when we look at employment nature here, what we see is that there is a high rate of informal employment in India, and this signifies that a large portion of the workforce is engaged in jobs without any formal contract, any kind of job security or any benefit as such. So that's why it includes a lot of roles, for example, the street vendors to small scale artisans, and these kind of people who are where the income streams, you can say in a manner, are unpredictable, and that's why they are vulnerable to economic downturns. So that's why this is something that needs to be highlighted, that a significant proportion is basically without any formals. So a lot of people are there in the informal jobs, and this is where we see that the incomes are unpredictable, where we see that the incomes are unpredictable. So that's why we have to understand these kind of issues. Similarly, when it talks about the labor market trends, here also you also see that when it comes to the even in case of, let's say, the employment nature that we are talking about, what we see is that the reliance, as the article also says, that the reliance is more on labor for income over the capital or land ownership. That also basically is something that reflects a broader economic structure where the wealth accumulation through the capital investment or land is very limited for the majority of the people. And this indicates that there is structural issues with the economy, which is emphasizing the need for the policy to encourage broader wealth generation and ownership opportunities for the people as well. So that's why there are these kind of issues that we have to understand, that largely people are dependent on labor rather than capital for their employment opportunities. So this is also something that needs to change. So there is a structural change that we require so that it can encourage more wealth generation and ownership opportunities for the people in the country. Then when it comes to the labor market trends, First thing, it talks about certain issues. For example, let's say when we talk about the rural women, we have talked about that the labor force participation rate in the rural women has seen a positive sign, and that's why there are more individuals who are entering the workforce, especially in the rural areas. Now, this could also be driven by economic necessity, where we see that maybe because of the improvement in education, or maybe improvement in the social or the kinds of societal changes that we have seen in the Indian society. Maybe these kind of changes are also leading to better participation in the rural areas. But it also poses a challenge for us to create enough quality jobs to meet this growing demand. If you remember, even yesterday we had discussed about this, that when it comes to the women participation in the job market, in the labor market, they are getting jobs, but they have to work harder to get the same kind of, or earn the same kind of livelihood. So that also is a challenge, that although we do see that there is a growing trend in women participation in the labor market, but they are not earning enough and they are not getting a lot of quality jobs, and this is one of the issues that we also need to address in these certain scenarios. So that's why here, with regards to rural women, more jobs, we see that there are more jobs but less quality jobs. All right. Then after that, when it comes to some of the other areas of interest for us, the unemployment rates. There is a decline in the unemployment rate. This suggests that more individuals are now finding work. But again, the quality of these jobs, whether they match the workers' skills and aspirations, this is something that remains a very critical question. So that's why this also has to be seen, that people, maybe they are skilled for something else, but they, just to find an employment opportunity, they are doing something that can earn them a livelihood. So that also needs to be understood, that skills need to match the source of livelihood. Then if we talk about some of the other things, the employment categories and the quality of work, we see that there is a rise in self-employment, especially among the unpaid family workers, and this points to a significant segment of the population which is engaged in activities, or in entrepreneurial activities, or contributing to family businesses without any formal pay. So this is something where we have to understand the things. For example, while the self-employment can be empowering, the growth in unpaid work suggests that many are working out of necessity rather than opportunity. So that's why this is also something that needs to be understood, that here in this scenario we are looking at unpaid self-employment. Unpaid self-employment is a big challenge in this particular scenario. And then the worsening of the quality of employment, that there is an increased share of unpaid family labor, and this highlights that there is a precarious nature of employment for many, which implicates that for the economic security and well-being, this is not going to be good in a long-term situation. So that's why it, in a manner, you can say that it indicates a shift which is away from a more formal and secure employment opportunity. So that's why this also needs to be understood. So shift away from secure and formal employment opportunities. Secure and formal employment. All right. Then after that, when we look at some of the other points, for example, the earnings and the economic disparity, here we see that there is a marginal increase in the earnings that has been seen, that there is a slight increase in the real earnings. And this in a manner could be a mixed signal, that on one hand it shows that some economic progress is happening, but on the other hand it also says that there is a very modest nature of this increase, and that's why there is an uneven distribution in the entire scenario of employment. Then apart from that, we also see that there is a stagnation for the salaried and the unemployed, that there the rise is not that significant. And in terms of the real ways in which there is an upward mobility in the economic situation, we see that that is not really increasing a lot. So that's why in a manner an inequality in the wealth situation has been worsening in certain cases. So that's why we have to also understand that there is an economic disparity which is also pretty evident from some of these data. Then demographic dividend and the economic implications. Now overall what we understand is that there is kind of an underutilization of labor capital, that India's demographic dividend is in a period where the working age population exceeds the non-working age population, and this will remain as such for the next 20-30 years. So that's why here India needs to ensure that a large population of the workforce is not involved in low quality or informal work, because otherwise this is not going to utilize the potential that India has of this youth that we always keep talking about, that India right now has a very young population, but in the next 20 to 30 years that will not be the case. And this is where again the aged population of India will start to rise and the young population of India will be a smaller proportion. So while we are in this phase where the young population is higher, we need to utilize this population much better so that they are involved in high paying work and also formal work with better conditions and better skill set. And this is something that will be very, very important for India's economic growth over the next 30 odd years. So all this also what we see is that there is, because of lack of significant income growth altogether for the majority, it also is impacting consumer spending, which becomes a very key driver of economic growth, because lower spending will when it comes to lower spending, the lower spending power among the majority, it can reduce the demand for the goods and services, and that is also something that will affect a broader economy altogether for India. So that's why we need to understand the demographies as well much better. And then lastly, the macroeconomic concerns that we have right now, that we need to understand that the focus on GDP growth very often overlooks the underlying labor market conditions. The sustainable economic growth and the improvements in the living standards are very closely related to the creation of quality jobs and the wage growth, rather than just a very pretty much you can say a macroeconomic indicator. So that's why we need to look towards a long-term economic growth and welfare, that the trends towards informal and low quality employment will pose challenge not only for immediate economic growth but also for long-term welfare and the societal stability. So that's why addressing these challenges becomes very, very crucial, and it requires very comprehensive policy that can focus on education, skill development, and also support for the formal job creation, alongside all the measures that are required to improve the quality and security of the informal sector jobs. So that's why there are these kind of issues that we need to be aware of, and partially this article also has been trying to talk about the same. Now, how do we address this issue? What can be done? What can the government do? We need to also understand this aspect. So first, promoting formal sector employment, that implementing the policies which encourage businesses to transition from the informal to the formal sector, such as let's say tax incentives or maybe simplified regulatory environments, and also access to finance for small and medium enterprises. So these kind of things can lead to these informal sectors coming towards formal sectors. So what all can be done? We can provide tax incentives. Tax incentives can be provided. Then small enterprises can also be helped, and then at the same time trying to make better regulatory policies, or let's say easier regulatory policies. So these things might help in creating this kind of an environment for formal sector. Then enhancing skill development and education. Now overall, here vocational training and education becomes very crucial. We have to strengthen the vocational training programs so that it can be aligned with the needs of the industry and focus on the emerging sectors such as, let's say, nuclear, renewable energy, or digital technology, or all the services that are going to drive the future jobs. For example, let's say even artificial intelligence for that matter. So that's why we need to ensure that we have vocational training in all these things which are upcoming. So that's why in digital education or AI based training, all these things are going to help a lot. Or as I said, energy sector, or especially renewable energy sector, all these sectors are going to play a very big role. And then after that, this learning will be something which is lifelong, because they are skilling up and they are going to be employed for a longer duration in the changing job scenario as well. Then supporting entrepreneurship and self-employment, that we need to understand that improving the access to credit for the entrepreneurs or the small businesses, particularly in the rural and the underserved areas, they can be very crucial, and they will help in the expansion of this entire system. And then at the same time, maybe training and support can also help, that providing the small businesses with training, financial literacy in a manner, or how to plan the business, how to market, all these things can also help many of these sectors. Then improving labor market information systems, that especially maybe there can be a very robust labor market information system that can also be built, so that if let's say there are job vacancies, or there are skill demands, or maybe whatever is the employment trend to altogether right now, they all think these all things can be done better, and that's why this can also help. So that's why improving the labor market information system becomes very crucial. So maybe it can be just like a job portal, or maybe about posting of the vacancies all across the industries and kind of skills that are being required in the present and maybe also for the future. So that's why this is also something important. Then strengthening the social security. Now in case of social security, we have to ensure that we have to provide some kind of social protection that can cover the informal workers especially. Very often, for example, a basic health care or pension schemes or unemployment benefits, and we do see that the government of India already has many of these schemes which are helping these kind of sectors as well. So that's why there are all these schemes that can help. Similarly, there are other things that we can do. For example, we can try and foster inclusive growth in this sector, that we can target you can say in a manner that we can implement the programs which are specially designed for increasing the employment opportunities for women, for the marginalized communities, and also for the youth. And this is something that can help in removing that barrier they have to entry, such as what we also discussed yesterday, child care for women, or maybe mentorship programs for the youth can be started. So that's why these are things that can also help. Then also creating quality jobs. Now here it is very important to leverage very large scale infrastructure projects as well as a means to create new jobs directly and indirectly by just simulating demand in the related industries. So wherever we see that, wherever these kind of developments happen, they often become very important for the employment opportunities as well. Similarly, their contribution to the green economy. So one can be about infrastructure investment, and then their contribution to the green economy. That how investing in the green economy, including renewable energy or any energy efficient and sustainable methods, it will also help in creating new types of jobs and industries. Even in that case, sustainable agriculture, there is a lot that can be done in India with regards to sustainable agricultural practices. Then similarly, regulatory reforms. We can make certain changes trying to strike a balance between protecting the workers' rights and also providing maybe flexibility to the employers also to hire according to the market demands. And then leveraging technology and innovation. In today's world, especially when it comes to how digital economy is working and how e-commerce is working, or even how artificial intelligence has started to take its effect. We need to understand and how exactly technology and these innovations can be very, very crucial. And then lastly, we can have macroeconomic policies as well, where we can try to implement these policies to try and simulate the demand within the economy itself. And that's why we can encourage the businesses to expand, and maybe that will itself create more jobs in the economy altogether. So that's why there are all these things that can be done in addressing some of these challenges that have been listed in this article. Now moving on to the next article that we have on the same editorial page, related to social justice GS paper 2 and environment GS paper 3. Gender equality as the plank of sustainable development. Now what is this article saying? What this article says is that gender equality and women's empowerment are very crucial for achieving sustainable energy and meeting sustainable development goals. And some of those sustainable development goals, like let's say gender equality, which is sustainable development goal number 5, or clean energy, sustainable development goal number 7, or climate action, sustainable development goal number 12. So these three specially have been mentioned here. SDG 5, 7 and 12. These three especially have been mentioned, that this is where women can play a very vital role, and women can play a very vital role in energy access, in production, in consumption, but often they face barriers which limit them from participating in the energy sector, and that also affects the economic growth and environmental sustainability altogether also. And women primarily, we know that they are also responsible in many of the cases for household energy management as well, and in many of the regions very often they have unfortunately they have the least access to modern energy resources, and that is why we see that it disproportionately affects them and the children, with kind of health risks to the household air pollution as well. The energy sector has exhibited that there is a significant gender disparity, and with women underrepresented in both the renewable energy sector and energy sector altogether, compared to the global labor force that we have, we see that this is something that needs to be addressed pretty well if we want better implementation of the SDGs. Similarly, addressing the gender disparity in energy requires changing the perception of women's role in the energy sector, and also integrating the gender in energy policies across all levels of governance as well. And that is why the support from the governments, from the non-state actors, and also from international institutions becomes very, very crucial in that sense. So that's why we need to understand that there are things that are required, and that's why it also talks about certain initiatives that are there, and how these initiatives can also become very, very crucial. That how these initiatives can encourage women's entrepreneurship in these sectors, and also help in their participation in the sustainable energy practices. So overall, that's why we see that there are a lot of things that can be done, and these are the things that have been mentioned and covered well in this particular article. So overall, when it comes to this article, it also talks about that when you close the gap in employment and entrepreneurship in the energy sector, this can significantly also boost global GDP and also lead to more innovative, productive, and socially beneficial outcomes as well. So that's why it talks about all that, and we have seen that time and time again there have been a lot of these studies that have indicated that if women participation happens in these kind of sectors, it always boosts the economy of a particular sector. And that's why here in this context also, in the energy sector also, they have to play a very, very important role in the sustainable energy future. So this is basically what this article has been mentioning. Now let's try to understand some of the aspects of what we see here. So here we are talking about sustainable development goals. What are sustainable development goals? These are, you can say in a manner, a universal set of goals and the targets that have been adopted in 2015. And as a part of the Paris Climate Summit, it was adopted by 193 nations that participated in that summit. And these sustainable development goals have been designed to be a kind of a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for everyone by the year 2030. They have been trying to address the global challenges which are required, which are related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, and also peace, justice, etc. as well. So that's why there are all these things that have been mentioned. And as you can see that there are a total of 17 sustainable development goals. And this is where the article is arguing that the participation of women can be very, very crucial in adoption of many of these goals. So that's why this is what we need to understand. And let's also try to go deeper into many of these sustainable development goals and understand where women participation can be very, very beneficial for achieving these goals. So for example, let's say when you look at sustainable development goal 1, that is no poverty. Now in this particular scenario, in SDG 1, women participation becomes very crucial in poverty reduction efforts. For instance, giving women access to financial resources such as micro loans or maybe savings accounts, etc. It can empower them to start businesses, invest in their families, invest in health and education, and also contribute to economic development in their communities. So that's why in that case their role becomes very, very crucial in case of sustainable development goal 1 or achievement of SDG 1. Similarly, SDG 2 talks about zero hunger. Now women, particularly in the rural areas, are very often involved in agriculture, and empowering women with access to land, technology or market can also improve the food security and nutrition for these women. So for example, the FAO or the Food and Agriculture Organization had found that if women farmers had the same access to resources as men, they could increase the yield of the farms by 20 to 30%, potentially reducing the number of these potentially reducing the hunger levels by almost 150 million. 150 million, according to a report that was published by FAO. Similarly, when we talk about quality education or SDG number 4, here also we see that women participation in education, not just as students but also as teachers and policy makers, is very essential to achieve quality education for everyone. And educated women are more likely to advocate for their rights and education of their children, leading to a cycle of educational empowerment through generations. And this is something that we very often have been talking about. And I'll again go back to what we discussed yesterday as well, that we need participation of women not only in activities or labor market but also in policy making, because once policy making also is taken into account, when we close the gender disparity that we have in policy makers, or the, let's say, amount of women participation in policy making, that itself will make a lot of changes in the policies all across the world, and that will help in getting these goals or achieving these goals faster. And again, there have been surveys that or reports that have been published where it always has said that if a woman in the house is educated, chances are higher that the children will also be educated, that is the next generation will also be educated. So that's why this has been reported in many of the studies time after time, and that's why I need to understand the role that they play in SDG number 4. Similarly, gender equality, SDG number 5. This goal stands at the heart of women participation. Achieving gender equality requires the removal of all the legal barriers, combating all the stereotypes, and also ensuring women's equal participation in economic, political, and social life as well. So for example, the countries with higher level of gender equality tend to have higher economic growth rates as well. So that's why it needs to be understood well. Similarly, when it comes to clean water and sanitation, here also women often participate women often we see that they become the primary collectors of water in many of the societies. We see that trend in India as well, that their involvement in water and sanitation projects, it also ensures that these initiatives are designed to meet the needs of all the community members as well, and the programs that involve women in planning and management have shown to be much more sustainable and effective. Similarly, providing affordable and clean energy. Now, women's involvement in clean energy sector can also lead to more sustainable and equitable energy resources or energy solutions as well. So, for example, the projects that equip the women with the skills to become renewable energy entrepreneurs have not only provided sustainable energy sources, but also have empowered women in economic sense as well. Similarly, we see that when it comes to decent work and economic growth, something that we discussed in the last article and also we discussed in yesterday's discussion as well, that women's full and productive employment and equal pay can boost economic growth significantly. For example, when we see increase in the female employment rates, we see that this is something that can boost the economy as well. And again, there have been studies that have been mentioning all these things as well. So we need to understand that. Similarly, reducing the inequalities. SDG number 10, empowering the women, especially for those who are in the marginalized communities, it can help in reducing of the inequalities as well. The programs that provide women with access to education, health services, and decent work are very, very crucial in this particular regard. And then similarly, when it comes to some of the other goals as well, we see that in when we talk about, let's say, goal number 11, their participation in urban planning and community development also can ensure safer and more inclusive urban environments also. For example, their involvement in the design for public spaces can lead to more user-friendly and safer cities for everyone also. And then, especially as the article also has mentioned about SDG number 13, that women are key stakeholders in climate action. Their unique knowledge and perspective can become very crucial in developing effective climate solutions, from very grassroots level initiatives to up to the level of policy makers. And that's why women-led initiatives have become very, very crucial. They empower, for example, let's say there in Africa, there is a program which is called as Solar Sister. Program which is called as Solar Sister. Now, this program in Africa, it empowers women to distribute clean energy solutions and demonstrate the positive impact of women's participation in climate action. So that's why these kind of things, they become very, very crucial in our understanding of how these things can lead to very important growth factors in the economy. Now, coming to the prelims based articles, first article, this is on page number 10, backed by BrahMos Navy's Minicoy base to keep watch over Arabian Sea. Now here we are talking about the Indian Navy, and Indian Navy is establishing a new base that is called as INS Jatayu. Alright, the name is INS Jatayu. INS Jatayu. Now this INS Jatayu is on Minicoy Island on Lakshadweep. If you look at this map, this is where you have the Lakshadweep Islands, and Minicoy Island lies here just below the 9-degree channel. Alright, so this is where it lies, and in this particular scenario, what we have done is that this new base, it has been equipped with radars, with airfield, and also with BrahMos cruise missile as well, to ensure India's security and India's footprint in this particular area. Now this upgrade is a part of India's long-term capacity to developing plans or to plan and project the islands which are very close to something which is called as the sea lines of communication. Alright, so now when it comes to this sea line of communication, we'll discuss about what we mean by sea lines of communication. We are trying to get close to the sea lines of communication, and we know that there is a growing Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean, and many of these are so-called research vehicles. So this growing numbers of research vehicles of the Chinese, this has been a threat for India, has been seen as a threat for India. And in this regard, Minicoy's strategic location becomes very, very crucial because it is only a few hundred miles from the Maldives, and that is why it becomes very significant in ensuring the global security. And apart from that, there are new radar facilities also that are being installed here. This will also boost the surveillance capabilities that India has. And at the same time, of course, the BrahMos missiles, etc., will always be crucial. Now, first, to talk about the sea lines of communication. The sea lanes of communication basically are maritime routes which are used for transportation of trade, goods and energy supplies between different parts of the world, and these routes are critical for the global commerce and the economic stability of the regions. Now we see that in many of the cases when it comes to the sea lanes of communication, and as you see in this particular picture as well, you can see that these lanes or these lines that you see, these are the ones which are called as the sea lanes or sea lines of communication. Now they become very vital because they are the trade routes. You can say in a manner that these are the trade routes, and hence they become very, very crucial from the perspective of international trade as well. So that's why their importance, and we need to understand that these are the lanes that are being used internationally and even by China for that matter. So, and then this article specifically has mentioned about BrahMos missile as well. So you know that BrahMos missile is what? It is a cruise missile, and in a manner you can say that it is the fastest cruise missile of the world. It is the fastest cruise missile of the world, which can reach a speed of up to Mach 2.8. Mach number basically means relative to speed of sound. 1 Mach means speed of sound. 2.8 means 2.8 times the speed of sound. Alright, so it can reach a speed of up to Mach 2.8. And we know that these cruise missiles become very, very crucial because they can go up to a range of up to 290 kilometers initially. 290 kilometers with a Mach 2.8 speed, which is very, very great for any cruise missiles, because any cruise missile generally you will see that these are subsonic missiles, so they are not very high speed missiles and they are low range missiles. But with BrahMos we have done better. And not only that, and these numbers that you see, Mach 2.8 and 290 kilometers, they were when India was not a part of Missile Technology Control Regime or MTCR. Initially India was not a part of MTCR, so we were not allowed to go beyond 3 Mach or not allowed to go beyond 300 kilometers. But then India became a part of MTCR, and now we are increasing this speed and trying to go up to Mach 7, and this we are now trying to increase it to up to 450 kilometers. So that's why we are doing great here in this particular scenario. And there are various variants of the BrahMos missile as well. For example, it can be launched from the ship, so there is the ship launch variant. Similarly, there is a land launch variant as well. There is an air launch version as well. So there are all these. So one lies with the Indian Army, one lies with the Navy, with the Air Force, and then apart from that we see that there is a submarine launch version also that India has. So that's why we have a capability of launching these missiles from, you can say, almost anywhere. And at the same time we are developing further also. The next one is also has been named as BrahMos NG or BrahMos next generation, which will be smaller and a faster version which can do a lot of things and can be launched from variety of platforms altogether. So that is basically where we look at the BrahMos missiles. Then the second article, Center tweaks PM solar free electricity scheme. Now what this article says is that the government of India has revised the PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana or the free electricity scheme. And this is something where we see that originally it was supposed to be free, but now it is covering only up to 60% of the installation cost according to this report. And the households must cover the remaining of the cost, and potentially maybe through a low interest, a collateral free loan, and the expense can go up to rupees 20,000 rupees. So overall in these kind of scenarios the banks will also be involved, and these banks will be taking loans, or they will be granting the loans to the rural households or any household for that matter where they are getting involved with this particular scheme. Now overall what also is being argued is that here whatever extra electricity is being produced, the extra electricity can also be given back to the grids, and people potentially can even earn from here. And whatever they are spending right now, in a span of 3 to 7 years, all that spending will be recovered very easily, and at the same time they will be it will be boosted further, that they will there will be further rebates, and there will be you can say even earnings which are possible through this particular scheme, because they can give back or sell back the extra electricity being produced. So what is this yojana, or what is this scheme? PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, or solar houses free electricity scheme. So the aim of the scheme is to reduce the electricity bill expenses of 1 crore people to zero by installing rooftop solar panels in their homes, right? And then the benefit of this is basically being given to the poor and the middle class families whose family income is less than rupees 2 lakh. So that's why these are the households for which this kind of a scheme has been launched. So just remember these basics about this scheme. Then the third article, food plate costs show vegetarian thali prices rose 7% in February. Now this article talks about a lot of data with regards to vegetarian food plate prices. Prices have increased by 7% in the month of February, and this has been influenced significantly by the rise in onion prices and also tomato prices, according to a new report that was published by CRISIL. The report title was Roti Rice Rate. Now here they also have mentioned about the non-vegetarian food plate, where the cost has decreased by 9% as compared to the previous year, that is February of previous year, mainly due to a 20% drop in the broiler prices from the last fiscal year. So this has been mentioned. So overall it says that look, onion and the tomato prices have risen as compared to last February, and that's why there is an increase in the prices. But overall, when the prices are being looked at from a month by month perspective, we see that the prices are lower. The vegetarian prices, the vegetarian thali prices are lower than last year, or let's say last month and last 2-3 months. And I think it has also been mentioned, for example, that since June of 2023, this has been the lowest price that we have seen. Now overall, this is basically what has been mentioned altogether in this particular article. Now overall, when it comes to this article, apart the data as such, I wouldn't say are important. What is important is what it discusses in terms of thalis. Now this is where there is a concept that was introduced by the economic survey of 2019-20, and this is called as thalinomics or thali economics. Now what is this thalinomics or thali economics? Let's try to understand that first. And this is what basically we need to understand. This basically is an approach that refers to a kind of approach which was introduced by the government of India, and this is to measure and explain the affordability and accessibility of basic meal across India. All right, this is basically about the accessibility and affordability. Affordability and accessibility. Alright, so it is talking about affordability and accessibility of the basic meals of the, I'll just write it here, of the basic meals all across the country. Alright, all across the country. And this concept was basically presented to provide a more tangible understanding of how inflation and economic policies impact an average person, and especially in terms of food prices. And that's why this thali, in this thali economics, it represents a plate of food that includes a combination of staple food consumed across the different regions of the country, and such as, let's say, rice or maybe pulses, vegetables, and also in some cases meat. And that's why it becomes very, very crucial, because it helps in measuring of inflation and the affordability, that overall we are able to understand the prices, and it becomes even, for example, it also takes into account all the regional variations, the diversity that we have in the Indian cuisine, and how the comparison of a thali varies from region to region. The composition of a thali, it varies from region to region. So that's why there are all these things that have been a part of this thalinomics. And it also is something that will impact on policies as well, that overall whatever the prices are, accordingly we'll see that the reforms and changes in the supply chain etc. will also be made to ensure that all the essential food items are affordable for a common man. Similarly, we see that overall it becomes very crucial for public understanding as well, that thali economics is something that is trying to translate very complex economic data into a format that is easier to understand for the general public, and that's why it can be used to understand the cost of a basic meal as a measure of economic well-being and a policy impact. So that is basically where we look at this article. Then the next article is India 4-nation EFTA bloc likely to ink FTA on March 10. Now here this article talks about how India and the European Free Trade Association, that is something that also includes Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein and also Finland. So these all basically are there included. Although what we see is that when it comes to, so if you look at these lines, Switzerland, Finland, Norway and Liechtenstein. So when it comes to these 4 countries, these are a part of the European Free Trade Association. Now overall when it comes to this particular agreement, what we see is that they are expected to sign a free trade agreement with India, and the agreement is something which is aimed at increasing the trade and investment flows and creating a lot of jobs and also maybe foster economic growth in India. So that's why we see that this is something that was signed, or this is in discussion. Overall investments could be worth $100 billion from these countries over India, or up to India, to until next 15 years of time. So that's why this is something that becomes very crucial in the prospect of India's growth. So just try to understand, I mean, in this context we just need to understand what do we mean by EFTA and what is this EFTA. So overall when it comes to EFTA actually has these 4 nations, and when it comes to these 4 nations they become a part of this, and especially when it comes to this agreement, this regional trade organization and kind of a trade area that is there among these 4 countries. Now this is something that was established back in 1960 with a growth of promoting free trade and economic integration among all these member countries, and as well as also with the rest of the world. And similarly also one thing you have to note, that these countries are not a part of the European Union, but they participate in European European single market, and also they participate in all the many of the European financial activities and economic activities. So that's why we see that they become very crucial in that sense, and they help in the promotion of free trade. They help in kind of an economic integration between its members with the rest of Europe and rest of the world, and they also try to establish global trade relations with regards to with different countries and different continents. So this is basically what we see here in this context of EFTA, and they play a very significant role in global trade system by facilitating access to markets, reducing the trade barriers, and also creating more opportunities for the economic cooperation and growth within the members and also with the countries outside. So one small question for you, from left to right, can you tell me which flag belongs to which country? Do you know which flag belongs to which country? Couple of flags are easy, couple of flags are not. Let me see whether you know or not. Now lastly, expanding settlements in Palestine a war crime. Now this article, just from an updates perspective, we should know what is happening here. The United Nations Human Rights Office has published a report this Friday, and this has stated that Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, they constitute a war crime. it talks about the report basically has covered everything from November 2022 to until October 2023, and has highlighted the advancements of approximately more than 24,000 housing units in the West Bank settlements, and marking the highest numbers that have been seen since the monitoring began back in 2017. And the Human Rights Commission chief also emphasized on the crisis in the West Bank, noting that there are settler violences and settlement related violations that have reached new heights, and they have been jeopardizing a lot of feasibility of the viable Palestinian state. And also he criticized the Israeli plans to build nearly more than 3,500 settler homes in these areas, and also stating that these are something that they basically are completely opposite to the international laws. So that's why these reports, they also have talked about the creation and expansion of these settlements by Israel, and that they involve the transfer of its population into these occupied territories, which is something that can be considered as an act of war crime under the international laws. So that's why this report becomes crucial. Also, it underscores the expansion of the settlement activities and the increase in the violence that we have seen in the West Bank. Although these violences have been overshadowed because of the conflict that we have seen in Gaza, but we have seen that in West Bank also these kind of issues are now being seen. So this is basically what this article talks about. So that's why just know an update with regards to the bigger issue between Israel and Palestine. Now, the two questions for from today's article. First, despite significant economic growth, India faces persistent challenges in its labor market. Examine the causes of these issues and propose comprehensive strategies that the government should adopt to transition towards more formal employment. So we discussed a lot of topics, that how exactly we can transition into all these and what are the things potentially that can be done. So you only have to use all those points here in writing this answer. Women's empowerment and participation are pivotal to the success of sustainable development goals. Discuss. Again, the entire article that we discussed, we picked out all these sustainable development goals and how women are going to play a very, very important role in achieving these goals. So you just have to take those points and have to mention all these accordingly. Start with a basic introduction of what are SDGs, and then you can carry on from there. All right. So this brings us to the end of today's lecture. Thank you very much for joining.